is it. Maybe even the bigger part of my work is leadership storytelling for the purpose of developing the team and developing the organization.
Oh, man.
So we're talking about sales stories, which is
Yeah.
a huge conversation. But if you're a sales leader internally and there's change that you're moving through the system, there's stories you should be telling about that.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. We are here with Leads to Growth, your favorite podcast, obviously, favorite sales podcast. And we're here with a great guest today, y'all. Very excited to have him up from the dead here with a little recovery time here. David Hutchens, well, welcome to the show, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. He's saying up from the dead because I'm coming off of a COVID experience. It wasn't bad. I didn't get too close to death, but you might hear a little bit of coughing in this podcast.
Yeah, but we're gonna have fun. Hopefully some funny voice drops with a little brain fog. But we're gonna get some great value. This guy showed up for us today, and that's one of the biggest things we always talk about is just showing up. And David is the author and CEO of the Storytelling Leader. Also a great book he just wrote, which is the Dash. What is it, David? The Storytelling Dash? Story Dash.
Find, develop, and activate your most valuable business stories in just a few hours.
And this guy is killing it. It's not just a book. This guy's really putting processes to work. He's got all the tools for you to really take storytelling and activate them and integrate them into your activities. And it's not just ideas. This guy's been proving these models for decades, working with Silicon Valley companies across Fortune 500s across Europe and Asia, all over the world. And he's been proving out his methodologies with companies like Nike, IBM, all the big boys. It goes on and on and on. This guy works with Olympic athletes and leadership training. And I want to find out more about that too. But really, thanks for being here, David, and bringing your genius for our audience.
I am delighted to be part of this conversation. Thank you, Chris.
Awesome. And we all know, like, it's one of the oldest sayings in the book in sales, right? Facts tell and stories sell. And so there couldn't be a more important topic to our audience today than stories. We're going from automation in this old school world of funnel, which is, telling a generic story, to everybody. And now we're going to this account-based marketing, which is really telling your story, and how you personally identify. And it's even more important now with the millennial and the younger generations. Their story has to identify with the brand story that they're working with, even as employees. So now more than ever, the stories are important. And so how did David, you've got a beautiful background that I want you to share our audience with a little bit, but how did you get here with all of the leadership experience that you've had, the instructional teaching experience, and now you've got your own brand and you're really leading the way with storytelling? What brought you to this place, sir?
So when we talk about stories, the way I talk about stories is with story types, taxonomies. Which story should I be telling? And so you're asking for one of the really basic, important story types, which is the origin story. What brought me here, right? I've got a lot of stories like that, Chris. Here's one. So I actually began my career in advertising. So I used to work as a copywriter in big advertising agencies. And so advertising people have known this for a long time, right? I learned early in my career that if I tell a story, people will buy more Coca-Cola, right? And so that's how I started my work. And after a while, I got tired of writing about hamburgers. I was spending 60 hours a week writing about things that I didn't care about. And I knew I wanted to write about leadership and innovation. And so I left the ad biz so that I could write about things that I care about. And that's what brought me into IBM as an organizational learning guy. And I still think of myself in some ways as an ad guy, but now instead of moving products, I help ideas move through organizations and systems. So that's one of my origin stories.
I love that. And you said the word, what was it? Was it taxonomy?
Mm-hmm.
And that is?
A taxonomy is just, it's a scientific word, but it's a way of creating structures and categories of meaning. And one way that I do that, for those who are watching the video, I'm holding up a resource called the Leadership Story Deck. This is one of the resources I use with my leaders. It's got dozens of ideas of stories you could be connecting to sales work or to innovation work, or if you're doing change and transformation work. Again, there are certain types of stories you should be telling for that work. And it's a deck of cards with ideas of stories that your sales leaders probably have and aren't telling. And so that's my work, is to help you find the stories you didn't know you knew.
I love that. And David, what you're saying is so beautiful too, because we talk about borrowing references, right? You as you grow, you borrow references. You also borrow stories and beliefs from other people, and these are okay to borrow as you're learning, but to identify your own, that personalization, that it's a beautiful way to get you in a way that it's focused on the other person, because you don't have to worry about the story. The story is authentic to you, so you can really be focused on that other person while you're telling a story. That's a great way to get salespeople out of their heads.
That's exactly it. One of the organizations I'm working with right now is the biggest technology consulting firm in the world. There are hundreds of thousands of employees all around the world, and this is what they're saying, because they're going into the sales conversation, and this will be for a contract for $250 million, $500 million, and increasingly their markets are saying to them, show us who you are. Because their customers are saying, hey, listen, in this sales conversation, we kind of know what you're about to say, because Deloitte was in here on Monday morning and McKinsey was in here on Tuesday, and we know that you've got something kind of similar. And what we want to know is, who are you? Make us believe in you. And my partners at Accenture, I guess I'll say who the client is. My partners at Accenture are saying, we don't know how to answer that question, because in the past we've always won with solutions, and now they're saying that it's harder to win with innovation because the shelf life of innovation is so short. And now, show who we are, make you believe in us. That they don't have language for that, and so we're telling stories to bring ourselves into the message so they can see who we are. And so that's what this work looks like. And today I want to give your audience some ideas of maybe what some of those stories can look like.
Oh man, we can't wait to hear you tell us a story, David. By the way, I do love the way, if y'all are listening to this, pay attention to the way the man speaks. When he says important words, he pauses. He delivers. The way he tells a story is so beautifully, not just in the words, but in the tone and the physiology. See the way he moves when he tells a story. These are important things. And sometimes we do them naturally. And most of the time when we do them naturally, it's because we're telling our own story, right? One that we've fallen in love with, one that we're confident in, one that we've told over and over again, that we're able to deliver it in that way. And this takes practice, doesn't it, David?
So I always tell, indeed it does. I tell people that my work is not about presentation skills training. I don't do public speaking skills. I work with people who aren't good presenters, or maybe English is their second language, or people who are nervous and stutter through the message. But if you tell the right story at the right time, it can be transformational. So yeah, when you do this right, you don't sound like a performer. You'll sound like you, talking about things that you care about.
Authentic. Yeah, that's beautiful. Beautiful. So you've got something to share with our audience, yeah?
So since I shared this idea that my work is taxonomies, selecting certain kinds of stories, when I work with sales teams, I find that salespeople are already thinking about stories. Salespeople tend to be a little bit better at this, not a lot better, but a little bit better at this. But what I'd like to do is expand the palette of the kinds of stories you could be selecting. And one of the first mistakes that I see leaders make is they fail to put themselves or people in the stories. So my first invitation to your sales leaders is, let us see you. Show us who you are in the stories that you tell. One of the organizations that I've been working with is NASA, their climate science division, and they're brilliant people. Some of them have multiple PhDs, and It is a government organization, so they have to go to Congress and ask for their budget. So they're raising funds from the government, and they're going into these presentations and they're bringing their slide decks, and it's all these scatter graphs, and when they show them to me, I feel like a moron because I don't understand what any of it means. So there was this one scientist I was working with, a young guy, Chris, and he was showing me his presentation, and he was like, "What do you think?" And I was like, "Ugh, gosh, I don't know. I think I understand it." And so, since I was coaching him, I asked the question this is a question I ask science and technology leaders sometimes. I call it the Geek Prompt. And that is, as he was showing me all of his data that he was going to bring to Congress, I said, "So, Chris, as you were doing this work, what was the part that was cool?" And he goes, "Well, I mean, I was doing my job. It's a scientific method. I don't know if it was cool. It's a discipline." I was like, yeah, I get that. But was there any part where you had fun doing this work? And he goes, "Well, actually, in this work, what we're doing is we're measuring methane gas in the atmosphere, which is hard to do because methane evaporates really quickly. So what I did was I chartered a private plane, and I had it take me way up high in the atmosphere. And I'm in this tiny little plane. I have to wear an oxygen mask. And I've got my spectrometer and I'm pointing it down and I'm measuring the methane gas." He said, "What was cool was I had my team in a Jeep down on the ground. And so they're rushing across these oil fields and they've got a spectrometer pointing up and I'm pointing mine down." And he said, "Because of our coordination," we're talking over the radio, "because of our coordination, we got the most accurate measurements of methane in the atmosphere of any science team at NASA." And then he paused. And he seemed surprised at what had just come out of him, like this energy that came out of him. And he said, "Should I put that in the presentation?" And I was like this, right? People who were watching my mouth
leaning in too, yeah.
Right. And I was like, duh. Right. And so one of the first things I tell people is, let us see you. Right. And what the NASA scientists are saying is, wow, it's working. We're telling stories. We didn't think this was a legitimate discipline, but we're getting the budget now. Right.
That's so beautiful because you led off with the challenge. A bunch of PhDs, and what do the other people on the other side? Do they want to feel smart or stupid? Nobody wants to feel stupid. Nobody wants to feel stupid. So the second you come in making them feel stupid, they're not obliged to participate in what you're doing. It's not like that. But if you make them feel smart and you pull them to make them feel a part of what you're doing, which is what you did with that story, you got them excited.
Yeah.
Finito.
I think people want to feel smart, and I think they want to feel connected as well.
These are our basic needs. Connection is a basic need, especially now with all the things that are going on in our world with the trauma, with what we've just been through in quarantine, with the wars and with all the challenges. People want to be connected with each other, and I think doesn't matter where you come from. That's such a beautiful. What excited you about this story? What a great question to ask.
Yeah. What's the part that was cool? So let us see you. Another thought is, let us see the process. And by that, I mean, when I work with innovation leaders and sales leaders, everyone gets very excited about the offering. Here's the new product. Here's the new feature. Here's the new value proposition. And we should be excited about that. The team works really hard to bring that forward. And what I'm saying is that this is a story where we peel back the curtain on that and let us see the people behind that. Let us see the process that made this new thing possible. I call this the Eureka story. And now, instead of just bringing forward the cool thing, now you're showing us the ingenuity and the creativity of the team that brought this forward. Because again, this is what Accenture's market is saying is, we're not just paying for solutions, we're buying you, we're paying for people and a team. So show us that. So I have another example. And this one does come from the story deck. Again, there's a few dozen ideas of stories in here, and there'll be a story type and a prompt, and then on the back side is an example of what it sounds like when somebody tells that story. So I'm going to share a Eureka story as it appears in the deck, and so I'm just going to read this one to you. So this is from another technology organization, and here's how the story goes. A young woman named Charisse shared this story with me, and she said, we were serving a $3 billion utility organization where we needed to monitor the location of every electrical transformer in the region. And this was nearly impossible because in this rural part of the world, that data didn't exist. We were amazed nobody had that. And the idea of us driving around to find every utility pole individually was a nightmare, like finding needles in a country-sized haystack. And so we were stumped. And I remember the team was working late right here in this conference room and eating pizza at 10 o'clock at night when Jeanette, one of our junior team members, said, you know what? I bet we could create an inventory of all those utility poles using a basic web browser, Google Street View, and an artificial intelligence engine to find and count them. And I nearly dropped my pizza. What a brilliantly simple solution. And so Jeanette created the code, and now we offer this software to other municipalities all around the world. And it's a great piece of software, but what we always say here is that innovation is more than cool products. Innovation is people like Jeanette who think differently to bring creative solutions to our clients like you. That's it.
Beautiful.
That's a story to tell. Yeah.
And why is it so beautiful? Because here's how that other story goes that doesn't have that beautiful Eureka story. The other story goes, oh, we sell this amazing service that counts polls for municipalities. What do you? All right, But the story he told got us excited, got us interested, saw a solution, like the other story is plain and simple. It is a fact-telling story. This story brings in a character, brings in a person, brings in people of innovation. And when you have that team, that's what you're paying for. You're not paying for the one simple idea that could have been pulled off a napkin of somebody else's table, right?
Right. Yeah. Even if somebody else has that software, they don't have Jeanette.
Exactly.
We can copy your solution, but we can't copy your people.
Yes.
Right.
This is very interesting because as we talk about VC money and all these investment companies, oftentimes they're buying the team, not the product or even the thing that's going on. There's so much dry powder out there that they're acquiring the company. But if the company doesn't work, we want that team because we know if they created this, what could they create next, right? So creators is the creation and innovation and that flexibility to evolve. I think it is a quality that we're seeing everywhere because you don't want a salesperson that's going to sell you that knows how to sell you one thing. You want a salesperson that understands your situation. You realize that by the salesperson telling you stories. You got it.
That's it. It's the simplest idea, right? And I always laugh when people act like this is a big new idea. This is the oldest idea that we're now rediscovering.
They're always the best. We get lost in the complexity of the discovery of new things, and then we always go back. Oh yeah, well, that was a layer of what we need to go back to the original, right? This idea of being human again, and
human again. Yeah. I keep using this word storytelling. And really, this is the language that brings more humanity back into the organization and back into the sales dialogue. Because when we tell stories, one thing you may have also noticed about these two examples so far is emotion, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's neuroscience around this. People don't remember what they think. People remember what they feel.
Feel.
There's science that says that's why we have emotions. It's called somatic marker theory.
Absolutely.
The reason we feel something is because that feeling puts a stamp in your body and says, remember this. I bet if you and I ran into each other in 6 months, you might say, I remember the NASA scientist story. You'll forget a lot of the stuff that I talk about, but you'll remember these stories, right? So
absolutely. And that's why I think it's so important. We talk about this all the time, that most of the stories that we tell in our past as an individual, storytelling is just as maybe more important, the way that you tell stories to yourself, than it is even the way that you tell them outside. And so I'm a firm believer of this, because most of the stories that we tell ourselves are filled with energy and memories from the past, from negative feelings and negative emotions. So it's so important that as you're trying new things, as you're building new things, as you're practicing your new storytelling techniques, that you celebrate every time, that you celebrate just the idea of practicing, the idea of trying a new story, the idea of growing and becoming more, because these memories stack up faster than you think, because you can't weigh out all the negative and not stack the positive just as equal. They'll help you build these habits and patterns even faster. Okay, so we're going to get back here, David. So the second story was the Eureka story. Do we have a name for the first story? Let us see you. What excites you? Is there a name for this type of story?
I didn't give that one a name.
Okay.
One of the stories I do focus on a lot with leaders is the Why I'm Here story.
Why I'm Here.
There's actually I told, that was my my advertising story,
your origin story. Yeah.
There's something I care about. There's something that happened that brought me to this work, right? And it's not just how I came to this career. It can be this new project that we're on. I wanted to be on this project team, and there's a reason why. There's something personal that connects me to this. So
yeah. And that's important too. I always ask these questions of why you're here. What got you here is because it tells me, most people who you find got themselves somewhere where they desire to be and where others desire to be, they made choices along the way that got them there. Their reason they got there wasn't, oh, well, this happened and then this happened and this happened. It's no, I wanted to do this and then I did this and then I did this. It comes from an internal place most of the time. It's very fun to hear the choices in bold, uncertain circumstances that a lot of people make that lead them to the places that they end up. And so I love that, David. So let's get to that third story, David. What's the third story we need to know here?
And by the way, there aren't only 3 stories. There's thousands of stories. These are just 3 that I've selected that might be interesting to your audience. And the third one.
Well, real quick, but I love I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I love the idea that I've never thought of the different styles of stories before like this way. And so you realize there are different stories, because when you tell them, you see the way people react and respond. Do they get the outcome that you intended for that story? And so I think just the awareness that there are multiple stories allows us to now start to look at the stories that we're telling and say, oh, that's a this, that's a this. What do I need here now? What would be better here now? And so I think the awareness that you're providing our audience is beautiful. So thank you.
Good. Yeah. Story is first a strategic act for leaders. It starts with selections. What's the outcome I'm trying to get? Now, what are some narrative assets, some value holding stories that will bring me to that outcome? And when I work with teams, that's what we'll spend a day doing, is being very intentional through selection, development, and then connecting for the outcomes that we want. Yeah. I
love that. Yeah. And so all David's programs, workshops, the cards, everything are on his website. We'll put that in the bio and the description of the podcast here, but davidhutchens.com. But go ahead, David, tell us the third story.
So the third one, so I'm focusing on the personal stories. The third one is the values story. And these are great stories to tell. These are the stories that say there's something we believe around here. And when you partner with us, when you buy from me, when you work with us, it's going to feel different, because there are these things that we care about, and we're not going to compromise them. Don't ask us to compromise these things. And let me show you what it looks like when this team is acting on the things that we care about. And these are really important stories to tell. And I find that leaders fail to tell these deeply human, personal values stories. And so I have an example for this one, and I'm going to do something a little bit different.
We love when people do things different, David. We love that.
So I'll want feedback from your audience of whether this one works or not, because I haven't quite shared this one on a podcast before. This is a story that I recently put on my Instagram. And so this is one of mine. And this one is really personal, and vulnerable even. And after I put it on Instagram, I ended up having some great conversations with some friends. I thought, I wonder what would happen if I put this one on LinkedIn. And so I'm for your audience who's watching the video, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you this story that's on my LinkedIn page, and I'll read it out loud for those who don't have the video. But tell me what you notice about this one. So I'm sharing my screen. You see a photo of me, and in this photo, I'm in my bedroom, and there's a mural of the Beatles painted on the wall of the bedroom. Here's what I posted on LinkedIn. I'm just going to read this to you. I said, "Mom, Dad, I want to paint the Beatles on the wall of my bedroom." This was in 1982, and I was 14 years old. They said, "Okay." And they didn't even pause during dinner. "Just don't get paint on the carpet." They always said yes and celebrated my weird ideas. They believed. I loved them for that. It gave me my career. It's a gift that I was intentional about bringing forward to my own kids. I went with Yellow Submarine because, well, it was easy. Flat colors and 2 dimensions. Revolver would have been way too hard. When Hurricane Katrina ripped our house apart in 2005, yes, this was in New Orleans, the Beatles stayed dry. It was a miracle and proof that God loves the Beatles. Mom and Dad rebuilt the entire house around that wall. 40 years later, John, Paul, George, and Ringo are still there. Earlier this year, we moved Mom out of the house. Since Dad died last summer, she just hasn't been able to take care of herself. Last week, we moved all the furniture out. Mom asked me if I wanted any of the furniture, but I said no, I don't need anything. I have the stories, and that's enough. It was so weird walking through the empty house. I could hear echoes of kids laughing. I could hear shouts of war and "I shot you, you're dead" in the backyard. But mostly, I heard the Beatles. "I Am the Walrus," "Good Day Sunshine," Ringo's solo in the Abbey Road Side 2 medley. I don't know what the new owners will do with the Beatles mural. Probably paint over it. Why wouldn't they? They don't have the story. I stopped by my room last to say goodbye to the boys. I raised my hand and returned the love sign to John Lennon. "Goodbye. Thank you," I said. "Love is all you need." That's it. That's the story I shared on LinkedIn.
Man, that's beautiful.
What's interesting is I don't mention my offerings in there. There's no value proposition. It's not a traditional sales kind of message. But I'll share my screen again. What's interesting about this is if you look down here, do you see that statistic? 18,780 views of this post. This got 18,700 views, which for me is a lot. I don't know what other people get on LinkedIn. Normally when I post something, I get 100 views. 18,000 views.
I mean, it's the execution of what you do in a beautiful way. And it was done so beautifully. And you know what, I'm gonna say something that I think that maybe some people feel out there is that, well, what a beautiful story. I mean, beautiful image. I don't have stories like that.
Everybody says that. Yeah. Everyone says, "I don't have stories like that." Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Your identity is nothing but stories. Your brain is made of stories. Stories is your brain's operating system for making sense of the world. When you go to sleep tonight, your brain's going to keep telling you stories because it can't stop. This is what your brain does. So when people say I can't find stories, I love that, because it's so easy to disprove. And that's what my work is to help you find the stories you didn't know that you knew.
I love it. And people don't understand that, yeah, all our brains do is predict and create a story out of what they predict, what it predicts will happen. That's what a brain does. Your eyes and ears, and they don't tell you what's going on. They tell you what contradicts what your brain has already predicted. Your brain is, go ahead.
I just love everything you say, Chris. I want you on my team. We need to hang out, because you're right. Again, the neuroscience supports what you just said. We have brain scans. We know what it looks like when someone's telling a story and when someone's listening to a story. And the theory says that there's a phenomenon called neural coupling, where our brains connect in a powerful way. So if you were feeling my story as I was telling it, you and I and your audience were joined in this really special way that data doesn't create.
The frequency that we were resonating at, yeah.
Right, and you were just saying we are predicting where the story is going. The neuroscience validates that as well. Not only are our brains joined, the MRI, or I guess it would be an EEG, shows your brain a split second ahead of mine.
Yes, okay, yes. The I Am documentary I watched. I can't remember, this filmmaker who created all the Ace Ventura movies and crazy raunch coms back in the 90s and early 2000s. He just kind of escaped from this, and he went through this experience where they tested his neuro, they put the sensors on his head, and they would display an image, but before they displayed the image, they would select the image they were going to display, and then they would wait a second before they displayed the image. But the heart would already sense it, your heart frequency would change based on a scary picture or a happy picture before you even witness the picture with your eyes. No other information to transfer, but your heart sensed it ahead. This is in the documentary I Am. But the heart resonates the frequency, and then our heart and brains work together with these frequencies. It is fascinating. And what you're saying, what you said earlier is my favorite part, David. This isn't a new concept, y'all. Mm-hmm. Look at the only thing that kept our attention as a child was story time. This is before video games and TVs. It was story time. We would sit captivated and listen to somebody read pages of a book that we couldn't even see the pictures of, right? It's innate in us to want to hear these stories. It's innate in us to want to tell the stories. So learn the stories, practice the stories, and find ways to create the stories. This is a whole part. So David, when you start working with somebody, so it sounds like, listen, the level of people that you're working with is at a very high level, right? And people that want to influence, right? Some have some impact or influence. What is the, what are the biggest challenges that you're solving out there with stories? I mean, as NASA, these are some big ones, but man, what else are you doing out there?
The biggest challenge that I would say when I do this work is fear. And there's something about this language that is story. I shared a really vulnerable story. Not all your stories have to be that vulnerable. The counting phone poles story, that's not a vulnerable story. Even that storyteller, I remember she was shaking and trembling as she told it. There's something about this language that is narrative, that when we start using it, it's like we're opening ourselves up. We're letting you see more of who we are. And most leaders I work with will come into the conversation saying, oh, I already get it. I believe, I love stories. But then when it's time to do it, people start chickening out. They fall back to their list of features.
Comfort zone, yeah.
Right, because this feels different. And so a lot of the work is leaning into that vulnerability. And that's the trade-off. We show more of who we are, and what we get is the engagement. The Beatles story, I felt a little bit weird sharing that one because it's so personal. I talk about this stuff, but I still experience it. I'm going, ooh, I hope it's okay that I'm showing this much of who I am. And what ended up happening on LinkedIn is I got hundreds of comments, including from old sales prospects from a couple years ago who sent me direct messages saying, "Hey, Dave, awesome story. Man, we haven't talked in forever. We should connect." Now now we're back in dialogue. Now we're talking again. So
it's so beautiful how I love how what you do. We talk about it all the time. Be who you want to attract. They say it in your relationships all the time, right? Be the one that you want to attract. People are afraid to be vulnerable because they're afraid to be authentically themselves. But what happens when you are authentically yourself is that you don't have to deal with the people that don't want to be you, that don't want to like you. You find and you attract the people that are attracted to you, which makes life a lot easier. And the other beautiful thing, David, is you're getting people to, you're helping them interrupt their own patterns of fear and of certainty of what they were doing, so that they can be human and vulnerable and interrupt the patterns of their prospects and audience.
this is the call to leaders of our age. I just saw the Korn Ferry workplace trends report that just came out, and they're saying this is the age of the human in organizations. Which I always laugh at that language. It's like, what were we before? But this is the conversation, right? I just read a book from the chief experience officer of Deloitte called "Humanizing the Organization: The Path to Love in Leadership." At Deloitte, they're talking about love in the organization. So yes, this is what Accenture has found too. Their markets are demanding that they show up with more humanity and bringing more of who we are. And I just said it was scary a little while ago. What's also true is it's fun,
rewarding, fulfilling,
it feels good. It feels better.
It's proactive excitement. It's proactive. It's like jumping off a cliff, or bungee jumping. It's doing something that's getting you excitement, but bringing you forward and helping you grow in life. But you've taken the time to think. You've taken the time to practice. You've taken the time to measure everything, right? And when you do it that way, listen, stepping into uncertainty is where growth is every time. The challenge is that oftentimes we're in uncertainty without a vision, without proactively taking the time to create the vision, the outcome of where we want to go. And when you don't take the time to do that and develop the beliefs that you're going to get there, uncertainty is scary. Why? Because you haven't put in the time, you haven't put in the prep, and you haven't programmed your brain for success. So it is a beautiful opportunity. I just love everything that you're sharing here, David. And I think this goes for everybody, top to bottom. The stories that you tell yourself influence your ability to tell stories to others, right? And then as sales leaders, don't forget that storytelling is not just about your brand. It's not just about the sales people selling to your customers. It's about how you influence your sales teams. The stories are just as valuable and then impactful in that situation.
So this is maybe even the bigger part of my work is leadership storytelling for the purpose of developing the team and developing the organization.
Oh man!
So we're talking about sales stories, which is a huge conversation. But if you're a sales leader internally and there's change that you're moving through the system, there's stories you should be telling about that. If you're attracting new talent, we're in the great resignation and the war for talent, and you want the cool, talented young people to come be part of your team and not part of a competitor. And this generation has choices, and they're coming into job interviews saying, "What's your story here?" Right?
Yeah.
You should be telling stories for talent acquisition. There's stories for organizational development, for fundraising, for knowledge sharing. How do we become a learning organization? Story is the language of knowledge sharing. So there's a ton of applications for this skill.
I love that, David. How do you? I mean, because right now we saw Coinbase just laid off 18% of their employees, I think yesterday. Mortgage industry, we've seen what's going on with that right now. And layoffs are big all over the country. So what is, as a person in a leadership position, how do you frame stories and how do you support your team that's still there, but not sure if they're going to be there tomorrow, and continue to keep them motivated and focused on the task at hand with an uncertain industry, with an uncertain position? How as a sales leader do you build stories to support them? It's a very interesting, it's because it can come across so inauthentic sometimes, because I believe the leader themselves is not maybe telling the story that they need to tell. So the story that they tell their people just comes across as false. And I think it all starts with beliefs somewhere, and then how you disseminate those beliefs is huge.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot. I have a whole other framework that I do, which is storytelling in uncertainty and storytelling when there's anxiety.
Oh, wow.
In
Okay.
the system. And to break it down quickly, it's stories of continuity, novelty, and transition. Continuity is there are some things around here that will never change that you can count on. And it's the stories of identity and values and founding principles and origin. And then there's the stories of novelty, the new. Those sound like imagine a world. What if it looked like this? Here's where we're going. And then the stories of transition are where we're talking about how we're making progress forward towards the new and how we're failing and how we're learning and how we're adopting new behaviors and new mental models. So that's a framework for storytelling in an age of anxiety and uncertainty. And if we ever talk again,
we will. We're going to be talking a lot more.
I'll show you some examples of what those can look like.
Perfect. And listen, what storytelling is so beautiful because you're directing the focus of your audience. And this is so important when you're selling or influencing anybody, is what are they focused on? Right. And this is half of influence right there. You said something. Well, yeah.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No. Come on.
Well, so we keep using this word storytelling. Yes. It sounds like it's going one direction. And in this podcast, it kind of is going one direction because you're interviewing me and you're being a great host. But what I didn't share is like the Beatles example. The conversation started with, oh my gosh, my favorite is Abbey Road, and right. And now we're just talking, and then they start asking me questions. Oh, you're from New Orleans, and now we're talking. Yeah. Now I'm not pitching, I'm not selling. We're just having dialogue. So there's this language that story invites dialogue. And especially if your customer says, tell me more about that. Right now they're asking you for more information. We love that in a sales conversation.
Great thing about a story. Don't give them everything. Leave some open loops in there that they got to ask some questions about. I love that. Yeah. And then some, create some questions within your story about favorite album or which one would have been better to paint on the wall and these different things. It's very cool. I really, I love the way that's put together, and definitely going to go check out your LinkedIn page again.
to that point, put questions in the story. That's one of my tips for telling that Eureka process story is tell it like a mystery story, right? So we had this problem, and so we tried a solution, and that didn't work. And we tried something else, and that didn't work either. And then you can even say, what would you have done? Yeah. Now you're inviting them into the mystery with you and problem solving. And you can say, yeah, we tried that, but here's what we eventually did. And now we're collaborating. Now we're co-creating.
That's very cool. You're pulling them in to engage, and that's everything. You also mentioned earlier about the value stories, right? The final story you talked about was the value story. One of the things that we do, our sister company, Envision You, which is our corporate consulting company, is we support companies to create their values and their isms. Some of the great companies, obviously, I don't know if you've been on the Zappos tour, but Zappos did such an excellent job of telling you who they are and why they were that way, and telling you, this is their values were just up front in everything that they did. And we created the isms for Quicken Loans. And Quicken Loans, our founder, Rod Hairston, was an in-house consultant for them. They brought him in, and he actually worked in-house and built out all the values isms with Dan Gilbert, and created that whole process. To this day, they're number 2 or 3 to work for next to Google and the Fortune top places to work. And they haven't changed any of the values and isms that we do. And they still today have workshops that they invite the entire community in, where they give them a book and invite them in to tell them their values and isms.
Oh, fantastic.
And so this is a process that we do. And so, and how we integrate that into the rest of the company, something I'd love to even talk to you more about, because the values are there, but how do the people tell the story of the values? How do they bring it out to the next level and continue that story to go on? And what's the story of the creation of the values and stakes, or whatever we call them, and so I think there's a lot to be learned here. And I want to say it over and over again, David. We talk about, you mentioned it, storytelling. Stories are something that exist. The same as role models. You have role models, whether you've chosen them or not chosen them, that they've been chosen subconsciously. You have stories that you tell, whether you've consciously chosen those stories or not.
Right.
So going to David is like going to see a psychologist. It's like, not like, it's like, oh no, I need a brain now. Can I get a brain with some thinking? No, you're like, no, you have one. It's doing the wrong things. You need to change it. And so you have a story you tell, and if the story is, oh, I can't tell stories, that's the story. It doesn't matter. You're telling a story. So change your story. And if you don't have the tools to do it yourself, talk to somebody like David. Take one of the programs that helps you find your internal motivation. Because a lot of times, if you don't believe you have a story, you're probably being more of a victim to life than the victor. And when you make that pivot and switch, I think that's a huge place that you probably help people get to, right, David?
Indeed, what you're saying is brilliant. You're right. We're already telling ourselves stories about ourselves, and our market is telling stories about who they think we are as well. And you're not powerless in this conversation. You get to lead and say, it's a yes, and let me show you the stories of who we are at our best. I'm thinking of Joseph Campbell, the great anthropologist, Power of Myth and the Hero of a Thousand Faces. He says, if you want to change the world, change the story. What's the better story that you could be telling?
You know what? I feel like I could talk to you for another couple hours, David. No, we're definitely gonna have to set up another podcast interview, and I'm going to find out where you are in this country and come track you down, man.
I'm in Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh man, I'm in Austin, Texas, man. We sister cities.
We are sisters, yes.
Yeah. And I just drove through Nashville a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to be back through there in the fall. So we're going to set up a time to get together in person.
I can show you where the good whiskey is.
Oh, I knew I liked you for a reason, David. Awesome. Well, hey, David, listen, where can our audience track you down, follow you, everything?
So I'd be delighted to share some free resources with your audience, including, I can email out these cards in PDF format of additional stories that you should be telling, including some that we haven't talked about. Send me an email directly. And what I would request is, in the email, tell me what you liked about this conversation or what stood out for you. So that's the one gift I'll ask for from you. What did you like and what stood out? And I'll respond, and I'll send you some cards with additional stories you could be telling, and maybe some other cool free stuff as well. My email address is david@davidhutchens.com. And I assume you can put this in your show notes.
Yes, spell Hutchens for them, just in case you're on the podcast.
Yeah, davidhutchens.com. And Hutchens is spelled with an E-N-S, not an I-N-S.
There you go. That's a good one. No INS here, y'all. David, listen, spectacular guest, man. Great smile, great energy, great storytelling, and I'm glad you're feeling well. You will be a guest on this podcast again if you don't mind. And that's awesome, man. Hey, get well. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We truly appreciate it. Make sure that you go put all the 5 stars down there in the reviews, and make sure you follow up with David. And don't forget, join NASP. But you know what? Most important, those stars, get those stars, get those stars. We'll see you on the next one, y'all. Thanks, David.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chris.